Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julie Grant. Opening statements are set to begin on Monday in the Ohio family massacre trial. The defendant is George Wagner. He's been in some serious trouble with several of his family members, all being accused by the state of killing 8 members of the Rhoden family. Prosecutors are alleging that George's brother Jake Wagner was in a custody dispute with Hannah Rhoden, which they say is what prompted the mass killing. Jake Wagner pleaded guilty to the murders last year, but his brother George, the defendant in this case starting up Monday, has maintained his innocence. He's admitting that he was there during the murders, but that he never actually pulled the trigger. Court TV legal correspondent Joy Lim-Nakrin gives us a closer look at the case.
It was a crime that terrified a rural Ohio area. 8 members of one family all murdered in what would be dubbed the Pike County Massacre.
This is a horrible tragedy that has occurred here in Pike County. Each one of the victims appears to have been executed. Each one of the victims appears to be shot in the head.
The youngest of the victims, just 16 years old. Their bodies found in 4 separate homes spread across 3 different locations more than 20 miles apart. The complex crime scene suggested a coordinated attack, a mystery that prompted law enforcement to appeal to the public for clues.
I want to urge anyone, any citizens that has any information concerning anything involving this horrible act to contact the Pike County Sheriff's Office, where we have BCI agents there. They're following up on every tip that comes in.
The investigation required resources, staff, and a lot of patience. It was 2 years before charges were announced.
At the center of this case were members of one family whom we believe the evidence will show conspired together to kill these 8 people. 8 of their friends.
George Wagner IV, along with his brother Jake and his parents Angela and George III, were all charged in the mass shooting.
This is very much a family affair. All for one, one for all.
Prosecutors say it all stemmed from a dispute about custody and control over the daughter Jake Wagner had with 19-year-old Hannah Mae Rhoden. Hannah was one of the victims, along with her parents, 40-year-old Chris and 37-year-old Dana, plus her uncle, 44-year-old Kenneth, and cousin Gary, 38 years old. Hannah's brothers, 16-year-old Christopher Jr. and 20-year-old Clarence, as well as his fiancée, 20-year-old Hannah Gilly, were also killed. Hannah and Jake's child was spared. She, along with another child, were the only survivors in the massacre that claimed the lives of 8 of their relatives.
We believe that the Wagners conspired together. They studied the victims' habits and their routines. They knew the layouts of their homes. They knew where they slept.
As George Wagner IV stands trial, his mother Angela and younger brother Jake are expected to testify against him.
It's not anticipated that you will ever be released from prison. Do you understand that, correct?
I do, Your Honor.
Jake is turning state's evidence in exchange for life in prison without parole. But there was another component of the deal. Prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty for him and the other members of his family charged in the crime.
Ms. Wagner, does that sound like an agreement that you reached with the state of Ohio?
Yes, Your Honor.
Jake's mother, Angela, has also reached a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for her testimony, she will serve a term of 30 years.
She speaks vividly of recalling speaking to Jake and George and asking if they were sure that they wanted to go through with this.
But the family testimony could be a double-edged sword for the state. The defense expected to argue George Wagner IV did not shoot anyone the night in question, based on his brother Jake's own confession. Their father, George Wagner III, will also stand trial at a later date.
How are these relevant to the crimes for which Mr. Wagner has been indicted?
Residents of this rural Ohio community will be watching and waiting for justice.
That was our Joy Lim-Nakrin reporting, and we're fortunate enough to have her in the studio with us today to give us a preview of what's going to happen on Monday. Joy, always great to see you.
Great to
and
see
you've
you.
done a lot of traveling back and forth. There are all these delays. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just been one thing after another. And starting with, I mean, you got to see the jury views already. Like the jury had begun their journey on this trial before suddenly the postponement. And
Yes.
so
yes.
Monday, you know, when they do return, what can they expect?
So finally, finally, we are anticipating opening statements to actually happen on Monday. And just a refresher, because I know there have been a lot of developments, it was because an attorney fell ill. An attorney involved in the case fell ill. So if all goes as planned and that attorney is fully recovered, you know, we are anticipating opening statements to begin on Monday.
Good. Wow. This is a big case, not only in the number of victims, as you know, Joy, the allegations are so sinister, and also it's being highly contested by the defense side in a number of these pretrial motions to try to exclude certain things because of all the parties involved, as you know, it becomes even more dicey because of two cases already disposed of, mom and brother, as you told us in your reporting. Dad's is still outstanding. You've been combing through those defense motions, which is no easy task. What would you say was like the biggest one, the most important one?
So really, you know, the motions concerning the testimony of the mom and brother, Angela and Jake, because of course, you know, in some senses, although it's a separate trial, they're co-defendants, right? And the whole theory by the state is essentially a conspiracy that this family voted together to take out members of the Rhoden family. So one of the major defense motions out of the 108 or so was motion number 80, and this concerns Jake and Angela. It was a motion to suppress the testimony of Jake and Angela Wagner. And it's a couple prongs to this argument. So, you know, they're essentially arguing that the plea deals that Jake and Angela have taken encourage them to commit perjury. And here's why. They say that Jake's requires testimony, quote, this is, I guess, you know, this is what it says in the motion, to the satisfaction of the state. In exchange, prosecutors will not pursue the death penalty against his brother and dad. And so the defense is arguing
Brother George, right, who's on trial now.
That's right, George, who's on trial now. And then the older George, who's the dad, is on trial later. But so the defense says Jake's deal is forcing him to testify in a, quote, particular fashion, or else obviously risk subjecting himself and his family members to the death penalty. And then there's another prong, and it seems to make sense when you think about it, right? I mean, we discussed last week, we touched on this, whether this is a death penalty case.
Right.
It is on its face, but we are anticipating the testimony of Jake and Angela, and that would remove the death penalty specifications
for them and for everyone.
For exactly, for everyone.
Yeah. Wow.
But they have to also testify for George 3.
Dad.
This is George. This is George 4. The son, right?
Yeah, it's easier to son and dad. Okay.
But here's the other prong to this: is that the defense is arguing they can't even do their job because essentially, if they do a successful cross-examination of Jake and Angela, then Jake and Angela will, of course, corroborate George's story, which is that he was not the shooter. And so then, even if the testimony on direct is what the state wants, if then on cross-examination defense is able to get what they want, then does that put George at risk of the death penalty? That's what the defense has argued here.
And so what does the state think Jake's going to offer them? That Jake's going to say George brother pulled the trigger?
That George, well, you know, here's the thing. That's what's really unclear. Because Jake, in his initial 12-hour confession, said that George didn't shoot anyone.
Right, right. So he's already on the record saying that to police, recorded.
Right.
Right. So the defense could play that.
So yeah. So that remains to be seen. I mean, it seems that that you know, conspiracy. I mean, in the state of Ohio, they don't. The defendant doesn't need to be shown to have actually been the triggerman in order to be convicted on a murder charge if they're found guilty of conspiring to commit the murder, which may be the theory that the state ultimately ends up going with because of what we're talking about, the reliability issues, potential reliability issues with some key witnesses.
Joy. This is so wild to me. I mean, it really is. Because here, so basically, I want to make sure this is clear because this is a lot. So you've got, you know, mom and dad, brothers, all charged, these 4 members of the Wagner family. Mom's pleaded, Jake's pleaded, dad, you know, whose name is George, and son whose name is George have not pled. And they are going to trial. Son's going first on Monday. And brother Jake and mom are supposed to be giving testimony. And
against both dad and
Yeah.
Both Georges.
Both
George
Georges,
3
right.
and 4.
And so what is the deal again with the death penalty? Prosecutors are saying to Jake Wagner, if you give testimony.
So if you give testimony to the satisfaction of the state, then prosecutors don't pursue death penalty against your brother and your dad. And I want to be transparent that the specifications are going to be outlined during opening statements. That's what I've learned from the prosecutor's office. Just spoke with them just a few days ago, and that was the latest. That was essentially what they told me when I kind of kept pressing for more information. Wait until opening statements, then you're going to hear all the specifications. But what we are able to glean just from looking at the motions is that the deal is you gotta not just testify. You can't testify and say, oh yeah, my brother George is innocent. You got to testify to the satisfaction of the state. And
we're not sure what that is. I mean, I'm assuming it's going to be that they're saying he pulled the trigger.
Or at least maybe he, or maybe he was a getaway driver. Maybe.
Yeah, right. I mean, obviously there's something here. But what about the death penalty as it pertains to Jake and Mom? Where does that stand?
Jake and Mom. So those have been taken off the table
already.
So Mom,
from the pleas.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mom pleaded guilty to everything but murder. So, you know, the conspiracy charges and all the other charges. And so her sentence was 30 years in prison.
Right. Okay.
But for Jake, he pleaded guilty. He admitted to killing 5 of the Rhodens.
Wow.
And you know, shooting at least a 6th one.
Wow.
And the death penalty was taken off the table for him. And that's something the defense has pointed to and said, look, this guy isn't getting the death penalty. Why is the death penalty still on the table for my guy, George?
I've never seen the pursuant of the death penalty contingent on a witness or co-defendant's testimony. That seems
you sound
pretty
like the
wild to me,
defense.
but
I know you were a prosecutor.
Yeah, no,
but you sound
absolutely,
like the defense.
I did a teeny bit of supervised criminal defense when I was a law student, Joy, but I try to be fair, right? Because our job, you know, our job at Court TV, we don't have a horse in any race ever.
Yeah.
It's just balls and strikes, and you know, this just sounds kind of wild. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see what happens on Monday with this. Yeah, no, a quick final thoughts.
One more thing, because there's still a lot to unpack, and I'll visit you again next hour. We'll unpack a bit more. But one other thing, the defense has also tried to keep out jailhouse informant testimony. So there was a motion about that, motion 93 in those 108 or so motions.
Yeah.
And basically saying, you know, jailhouse snitch testimony is unreliable, self-serving, and the informants. The state says the informants came forward and they weren't promised anything, but ultimately the judge sided with the state. They denied defense motion, so these jailhouse informants are going to testify.
Oh boy. All right, Joy Lim Nakrin, thank you so much for all of that. We'll see you back here in just a little while.